Welcome back to Generals on the March. Generals on the March is a storytelling podcast focused on telling the athletic history of Washington and Lee University through sit-down interviews with alumni, coaches, and athletes, detailing the athletic experience at our school and explaining how our unique history, traditions, and values make this experience unique. I'm your host, Thomas Wakefield, a first-year football player here at the university, recording from the Generals Redoubts podcasting studio here at Fancy Hill. Join me today as we sit down with Austin Halterman. Austin is a thrower for the Washington and Lee track team. He throws the hammer, and this past fall was a W&L Scholar athlete. Additionally, he has done some research on the athletic history of our school, and especially related to track and his throwing event. So Austin, let's start out with the usual first question we ask on this show. How did you, as an athlete, end up at W&L? How was the recruitment process? Where else did you look? That whole kind of thing. You can go into as much detail as you like.
So just first, thanks for having me. And then really, it was Washington and Lee itself that pulled me in, not so much athletics. I was committed to Washington and Lee from the first tour I took. I immediately fell in love with the school, and I knew I wanted to come here. I was a walk-on athlete for the track and field team. In high school, my freshman year, I did no sports. My sophomore year, I started in football, and then I did track and field, indoor and outdoor, to just stay in shape. And I enjoyed it. I was not very successful and moved on to my junior year, tore my ACL, missed my indoor season, stayed with it for track and field, decided to step away from football, and I kept grinding away, but I was not seeing many results. In Virginia, hammer throw is illegal.
Mm-hmm.
There have been several fatalities in Virginia and in several other states that have led to the event being banned. So moving into my senior year, I had reached out to the coaches at Washington and Lee. I was not getting the feedback I wanted to see. And I went to a private coach I was driving away to see, and I asked him, what can I do? What will let me get on the team? And he suggested that I try a new event, an event that Washington and Lee is less competitive at. And so I started weight throw is the indoor version of hammer.
Mm-hmm.
I started weight and hammer about 3 months before the end of my senior year, and I was rather successful at those events, and it was enough that in June of 2025 I received confirmation that I was going to be allowed to walk on with the team.
It's an amazing story. So how many other hammer throwers are there at Washington Lee? Are you the only one, or how rare is this event?
The way that Coach Gibson, that is our throwing coach
Mhm.
at Washington and Lee, the way he goes about it is, especially our freshman year, he tries to get everyone to try the majority of the events.
Gotcha.
And you typically see athletes who will do multiple events, but we certainly have our own niche events and our specialties and the events that we're best at. So in that sense, I'm our only designated hammer weight thrower. We have several other athletes. Leo, he's a junior. He does hammer and weight rather competitively. And then our two other first-year men, Ezekiel and Maddox, they are both doing work in weight and hammer, but they are focused more intently on shot put and discus.
Gotcha. So how is that to come into a space where there's not really like a track set before you in terms of, obviously you have older throwers and you have older guys that do the hammer, but like you don't have a dedicated person that's a senior leader in the hammer. So how does it come into a space like that and have to carve out your own niche and role on the team?
I would say that's something that I was well equipped to handle given my high school experience. My high school did not have a throwing coach. I was one of our only competitive throwers. We did not cultivate a culture of success on my high school track team. And
Gotcha.
so moving in, I really had to make a concerted effort to try to cultivate that culture and move us in a more positive direction. So I was fairly comfortable coming in with doing that. One thing that is interesting in the throwing world for track and field, and just in relation to sports in general when moving from high school to college, is we're one of the few sports where you see a tangible change in the events, to where we move in weight throw, we move from a 25-pound implement to a 35-pound implement. And in the hammer, we move from a 12-pound hammer to a 16-pound hammer.
Wow. So in the spring of your senior year, did you train with the college weights or did you train with the high school weights, or did you work your way up?
I trained with the high school weights primarily, just learning the events. And also, I was really chasing marks to try to receive a roster spot at Washington and Lee.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned you fell in love with Washington Lee from your first tour. I was curious because That's actually a commonality. If you listen to other episodes, you'll see that Will Knight, Jack Camp, they both shared the experience of coming here and then leaving set on where they wanted to go. So I was curious to hear, what was it for you that you came here and what stuck with you that was like, this is where I want to be?
I think first of all, I'm from outside of Williamsburg, so I'm about 3 hours away. I knew coming into my college search that I wanted to primarily stay either in state or within a bordering state. So regionally, the Washington and Lee fit. And then I think it's hard to articulate, and I think a lot of people would agree on this
Yeah.
that there's not a singular aspect of Washington and Lee that a lot of people can call to. I think a lot of people will just say that when they step on campus, there's a special feeling. It's a gorgeous campus. You hear a lot about the speaking tradition, and just when you walk around, it feels friendly. And I think in the modern day world, it's becoming rarer and rarer to just see people be nice for no reason. So I think when you step onto Washington and Lee's campus, it's really refreshing. It's a breath of fresh air to just see such immense humanity and compassion from everyone who surrounds you.
I would totally agree. Again, a lot of our previous guests, and obviously me too, I think everyone honestly will attest to the familial atmosphere of our school. And there's a lot of small colleges in the nation. There's a lot of academically elite small colleges. But I would say that from whatever if it's our sports teams or our Greek letter organizations or even just the campus at large, the Washington and Lee community is really a family. And there's a lot of families within that family. But I think that camaraderie and like what you can call it, like brotherly spirit, whatever it is, I think that is a really something about our school that's really sticks with people and impresses them, which is, again, something really cool to see.
I find it really funny that you said the familial atmosphere and the brotherly spirit.
Yeah.
Because my brother, he's a sophomore at
Yeah.
W&L. I know you know Trent.
Yeah, we know Trent.
And then also with the Greek letter organization aspect, Trent is in the same fraternity as me.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, like if you hit on that, like there's guys here who families have been going to Washington and Lee for like generations. There's a freshman football player I know who's like a sixth generation Washington and Lee student, which is again insane, but it says something about the school, I think, that people send their kids here generation over generation or generation.
Yeah, that's absolutely a testament to the school. And it's extremely impressive. I honestly think I know more sibling pairs at Washington and Lee than I did in my own high school. And that is absurd to see a post-secondary education like institution that has more sibling pairs that I've known anecdotally than my high school for a singular county.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, but moving on from general impressions of the school and how you got here to the transition and obviously athletic experience here, I was wondering two questions in one. If there was any major difference, obviously, you mentioned your high school small, didn't really have a lot of success in track, so I guess that's a difference, but any major differences between throwing at Gloucester and throwing here at W&L, and also just what's been some of the best moments because we just wrapped up indoor season, kind of moving into outdoor now. What's been the best moments so far of those seasons for you? Again, two questions in one, but tackle that however you'd like.
The most obvious difference that I would say is just the amount of resources we have. Having a dedicated coach, having an extremely high quality weight room, having an extensive amount of varying weights in the implements. So in throwing especially, you see a lot of light ball and heavy ball work where you get to focus on different technical cues in your practices. Just with a light ball, for instance, focusing on just feeling throwing the ball further and really getting the throw out there. Or with a heavy implement, just working on pushing the ball further, working on accelerating it. And then from an experience standpoint, my favorite meet was definitely our indoor opener. We had one meet before our Christmas break this winter in December, and I was extremely successful at that meet. I threw 1382. So in track and field, we used meters, not feet. That is about 45 feet, 7 inches.
Nice.
And that was just a really great moment. I spent my entire time in high school really just battling against the script that I was not a very successful athlete. So to come into my first meet and have immense success, that was just such a phenomenal feeling.
I imagine.
I was frustrated with the indoor season. I was sick a lot. I missed several meets due to illness, and just my training definitely suffered to where I was never able to surpass the mark of that first meet. But it was such a phenomenal environment. We have an incredible culture on the track and field team, and I know that's a pattern that's common throughout most of the sports teams at Washington and Lee.
Yeah, and just curious for the listeners' benefit and my own, was that 45 a personal best, and what that end up getting you at the meet?
So in that meet, I placed second. I lost out to Leo.
Okay.
So thankfully, we did win the meet. We went 1-2, and we were extremely happy. We beat all of the VMI competitors, so
Nice.
we were able to place higher than D1 athletes. And then, so it's hard to say that that was a personal best. It certainly was, because with the implements going up in weight when you move to college,
Oh, yeah.
so you really have that first meet as a benchmark of
Yeah.
where you expect to be. But in a holistic sense, that was absolutely a PR.
Nice.
Quite a few college athletes in the throwing world, they spend their entire freshman year unable to meet or surpass the marks that they threw in high school just while they adjust to the heavier implements.
Mhm.
I was ecstatic to my first meet surpass the marks I threw in high school. I threw, I believe, 1349 in high school.
Gotcha.
So it was roughly 30 centimeters further than my high school PR.
That's very impressive. I think we have a lot of freshmen this year across a lot of different sports, contributing to teams in major ways, which hopefully is something we'll get into more in future episodes. And I think the thing you mentioned about the track team culture, obviously can't speak for the track team, but Mason and Jack have both echoed that point as well. And I think that honestly, the sports cultures across W&L are great. Honestly, when you compare with other D3 schools, at a lot of those schools, like the athletes are the main like social groups, so to speak, because athletes are usually such a big part of D3 schools. But I feel like here at W&L, the athletes are not like the only friend groups, but there's definitely a mutual respect among athletes of all sports and a mutual kind of brotherhood that comes with wearing generals across your chest. But yeah, and I think it's again very cool and speaks to the familial atmosphere we have here.
I I agree with that. I think you hit the nail on the head that at Washington and Lee, it might not be as large of an emphasis as it is at most D3 schools, just with the prevalence of the Greek letter organizations, and then with those factors. But you absolutely see a mutual sense of respect between the various sports, and especially like track and field within the different event groups, because unlike most sports, we are so separated between the event groups. So the throwers, we practice over a mile away from wherever every other event group
Yeah.
is. So we're very isolated, but there is still that sense of mutual respect. And I also think another testament to the university with our athletic culture is the success that you've mentioned with our athletes. Several of our track freshmen, we had 12 total freshmen on the track and field side of things, and then 6 on the distance side. But several of our athletes in this incoming freshman class had offers from D1 schools such as Dartmouth.
Wow.
And I really think that the prestige of our university and the impressive culture that we've cultivated on an institutional level, that really enhances our athletics, and it offers immense opportunities to people through financial aid
Yeah.
and just elevated studies that pull them in favor of some D1 institutions.
Agreed. I think the elevated studies thing is a common thread because at a lot of D1 schools, or not maybe not a lot, but like the top end, and certainly some higher academics, they push you away from certain majors and areas of study because they don't want their star athletes getting stuck in biochem labs for pre-med or these ridiculously hard math classes. And I think, again, it's the university's credit that, and again, a topic we hit pretty much every episode is that balance between academics and athletics, where no one here is pushed towards a specific major by their coaches. No one here is like pulled or pushed away from anything. In football, we've got pre-law guys, we've got a bunch of business finance guys. That's just a really common thing here. But we also got a bunch of pre-med guys, and nobody is pushed away from doing any of that. The coaches will acknowledge, like, yeah, some of it's harder than others. The Williams School and pre-med are not easy, but they're like, when you come to Division III school, you got to make the sacrifice. If you choose to do a hard major, that's on you, and the coaches will work to accommodate that with like practice schedules. And if you've got to miss stuff, they understand for the most part, but they're also like, look, you can't completely slack off on your athletics to fulfill your academics, but you also have to fulfill your academics to do the athletics. So I think the balance between the two is a lot higher than some other schools where maybe athletics are up here, academics are down here. And here we're really encouraged to keep it balanced and excel in both areas. And again, now that we're on the topic of academics, I was wondering how your academic areas of interest have developed so far. And maybe we can get into some of the research you've done related to the history of your event and track at W&L. But just generally, when you came in, did you have a plan on what you wanted to study? And like, how was your first semester or so here? Change that?
So arriving at W&L, I did not have an immediate goal for what I wanted to study. I had a general sense that I was interested potentially in something in finance. But one thing that has emerged, which has been a lifelong interest of mine, but now W&L has offered the resources to pursue it at a higher level, is I'm currently intending on double majoring with one major somewhere in the finance world
Yeah.
with accounting or economics or something of that nature. And then my other major, I'm intending on being sociology.
Okay.
And just with that, it's really interesting to see how those things connect. And obviously, from an economic standpoint, see how they connect on a more macro level from our nation as a whole. But then sociology, it's a very diverse field and it employs you with a lot of soft skills that really lets you look from a W&L standpoint, from an institutional level where it's a very local,
Yeah.
tight-knit community, but the skills you learn in that allow you to look and see how we interact. And for instance, what you were saying with the balance between academics and athletics and how something like the honor system instills this greater sense of accountability in individuals and how that amplifies the athletic dedication that we see from W&L students in accomplishing great feats in both aspects of athletics and academics.
Yeah, that's really impressive. And I think that there's a reason that a guest like this exists. There's a reason that there's like a whole bunch, like there's a reason we have an institutional history department because there's so many unique things that have happened out here at our campus over the past 270 some odd years that are worthy of documenting and exploring. And I think that it's just cool for the students that we have a place that's so steeped in the history of both its own history and the history of this nation, but also just like to see how it creates a place that's so unique and special like that. And I think also that like the double majoring thing, like how many people here do you know that have two majors or like single major, double minor? Everyone here is so involved in so many different things across the campus, and it's really cool to see. But yeah, that's just something that has always impressed me too, is like the amount of people studying such a broad array of things. Like you'll have your econ sociology double majors, which you wouldn't really expect.
And then moving into the institutional history aspect, especially when looking towards the athletics, I'm currently in a 200 level sociology class. It is a special topic seminar that is studying the connection between sports and religion. And this past week, we had the opportunity to go to the special collections classroom in Leyburn, and we were able to look at a wide array of documents from the institution's history, especially with how it relates to athletics and the honor system.
Mhm.
One of the pieces that I was really blown away by is a document from 1883, which goes over the meet results. From my understanding, the first officially held and documented athletic competition in W&L's track sense. So
Gotcha.
on the global stage, track and field is called athletics. The average person, when they hear athletics, they're not going to immediately go to track and field,
Mm.
but it's just this, it documents the majority of the contemporary events you see today. So you're going through to the standard things such as the 100-yard dash, which is now converted to the 100-meter.
Yeah,
Then you have high jump, broad jump, long jump, pole vault, and then obviously the thing I was most interested in was the results for hammer throw.
of course.
And the winning mark for hammer in this competition was 87 feet. And it's really entertaining to look at because hammer as a sport has evolved quite a bit over its history. And from what you see today at a more Olympic style sense of competition is very different from what you saw back in the day.
Yeah. So this event, do you know who were the competing schools? I would assume it would have been us and VMI because a lot of the firsts in the region were us and VMI. We had the first intercollegiate football game in the South was between us and VMI. Same with actually baseball. The first game in the South was played between us and UVA in Charlottesville. But I was wondering if the document showed a mention of other schools or institutions.
This document does not indicate whether or not this was an intramural competition or if it was open to other local universities. I'm not exactly sure. I'm confident that you could likely go in and look through the records of the competing athletes and potentially find evidence of whether or not, for instance, VMI was in here. From my understanding, this was largely an intramural competition.
Gotcha.
But the really interesting thing with Hammer as an event is with track and field, the majority of the events have their origins in a more like Roman competition sense with the modern like Olympic Games, which started in 1908, whereas the hammer throw, it originates largely from Northern Europe with the Highland Games and so originally hammer throw got its name because athletes would compete in throwing a sledgehammer.
Oh.
And so the event was not largely unified in its operations and rules until the like early 1900s. And so with this, you would see in England, for example, Cambridge would throw a 20-pound implement, whereas
Gotcha.
Oxford would throw a 14 to 16-pound implement. We do see with the records in this that W&L was using a 14-pound implement, and the predominant technique at the time was just a simple overhead wind. You would see an athlete wind the implement around their head 2 to 3 times and then release it. And like furthermore, you would also see, whereas today we use steel wires, we use about a 39-inch wire attached to a swivel on each end and a handle. Back then, you would traditionally see a 4-foot wooden handle attached to the ball.
Wow.
And you would just have to try to produce as much rotational torque as possible to get it out there. And just the event as a whole has completely transformed over the past 150 years. And that has, looking at results, enabled people to go from throwing 130 feet at the most competitive level to 270 feet as the Olympic standard for what will typically set a world record or win gold. But you've got to be up in the mid-high 250s to be competitive at a global level now.
That's insane. Because for the listeners who may not know, the Highland Games are a Scottish competition, basically involving just general feats of strength. Honestly, very entertaining. But no, it's crazy to track the progress of sports like that. And so the 14-pound hammer, has the weight changed much at all? Are you still using a 16-pound hammer in college now?
Yes, so men use a 16-pound hammer in college.
Yeah, so that's a change, I guess. But it is interesting to see what's common and not common over the times. But yeah, the fact remains too that Washington and Lee was a pioneer in a lot of major sports, especially like South, because a lot of these major sports were considered like the activities of what like we would call today the Ivy League. Football, baseball, all were New England sports that took a while to trickle down south, but W&L was among the first in adopting all of them, and I guess clearly track as well.
And then I'm glad that you mentioned that on our influence at an institutional level and how members from the Washington and Lee community have been able to go beyond W&L and really influence the outside world as a whole. Another document that is just incredible is a personal letter that Frank Thomas wrote to George Denny in the late 1940s. And for those unaware, Frank Thomas was the first ever coach to win a national championship with Alabama for football. And George Denny was the Washington and Lee president during the 1910s.
Yeah.
And when he moved on from Washington and Lee, there was a massive uproar. He was beloved in the W&L community. And when he announced his intention to leave, there were actually protests from the W&L students and faculty. They picketed outside of his home in an effort to keep him here. But he did move on to Alabama. He was, I believe, the president at Alabama for a while. And he was one of the most important individuals in terms of transforming Alabama's football team into the national powerhouse that is known today.
Yeah. President Denny presided over a lot of athletic success at W&L here too as well. The 1910s were one of the better periods in terms of our athletics in general. Obviously, if you've listened to the Neely episode of the podcast, you'll know all about Cy Young and his exploits during that time. The 1915 football team was champions of the South. The 1917 basketball team is one of only, I think still, unless women's basketball, if they can get it done this year, it's the only undefeated basketball team in the history of the school. But I wonder what President Denny was doing to achieve such remarkable levels of athletic success at both of his stops.
I know it's truly impressive. And just, I think one thing I love to see is how much W&L influences the outside world, but it's so often in ways that the average person would not recognize.
Scott Abel at Rice right now. Yeah, the football coach we used to have, Scott Abel, is currently the head coach at Rice. He was the one who brought the unique offense that we run in football and that Rice runs now to like national prominence. It's cool to see that. And it consistently happens too. W&L influencing the world at large.
And with that, just for Alabama football, Bryant Denny, the Denny part of the name is George Denny. So it is originally a Washington and Lee president that is the namesake of such an integral part of Alabama football. And just to think how many tens of millions of people know the name from Alabama football, and just almost none of them will ever attribute that to Washington and Lee. So it's incredible to see how an institution of our size is able to generate such extreme influence over the world as a whole.
No, yeah, it's absolutely incredible. I understand you have documents related to like 1940s, I think it's what, straight T, like playbook thing? Yeah.
In this personal letter, he just expressed his general fondness for Denny, just general pleasantries that you would see in personal letters at the time. But then at the end of the letter, he included several pass plays that he had drawn up, and he was just seeking advice from Denny on his mind.
Wow.
And I know I played football in high school, but Thomas, I know you're a more gifted football mind if you'd like to look at these plays and discern what's going on.
This looks this play looks like the first one, funnily enough, looks like a play that Salisbury currently runs out of a slightly different formation, but I recognize this from the scouting report of this fall. They pull out both guards to pass protect, and quarterback boots out, and you've got a post corner. But no, yeah, this looks like all some pass plays drawn out of the straight T, which was straight T. Can't attribute that innovation to Washington and Lee. It was a kind of cutting-edge football offense at the time in the 1940s, so that is cool to see, again, Washington and Lee being on the cutting edge of these things. And obviously passing, too, might have been considered a little cutting edge at the time as well. But no, yeah, this first play, like the only difference when Salisbury runs it is they move these two backs up on the wings and run out of the flex bound, but that does look like it, funnily enough. Yeah, this one we'd call just a pretty simple wingback cross play, but yeah, just post corner, post, and then a cross route. And then looks like they're faking a sweep and then they're trying to hit a tight end pop. That's really cool to see. And like special collections is so many things like this. Like I went there for an archaeology class my first semester, but there's so many just like cool things they have. Like I remember because I had to write a paper and I had to like read the trustees' minutes out of this like old tome that was like 1775 to 1870. And somebody had like compiled it for I think for Robert E. Lee around the time of the end of his presidency or near his passing when they renamed the university. And that was really cool to see.
And I think one thing with special collections that is just phenomenal to me is not just the prestige of the documents they have, but the accessibility that they offer to students. One of my most vivid memories of my first tour, I love history, my family loves history. And so when I first toured Washington and Lee my sophomore year with my brother and my parents, they talked about special collections on the tour and they talked about the history aspect. And so when the tour was complete, we went into labor and went down to special collections. And two of the documents they had out at the time, they had a second edition of one of Thomas Jefferson's books, and it had his handwritten revisions in it for the plans he intended to implement in future productions of the book.
Wow.
And they handed it over to us. It's a book that is several hundred years old with the handwritten revisions of a founding father.
Yeah.
They handed it over to us, and they let us flip through the pages. They let us run our hands over his pen strokes, and it's just incredible to think about the history and how Washington and Lee has been able to aid in the preservation and reverence of our nation and institutional history.
Yeah.
And then another document that we have is we have the only surviving copy of General Lee's General Address Number 9,
Yeah.
which is his surrender order. And so what he did is he wrote in his own handwriting in a version of the address for every one of his commanding officers, so they could go to their troops and show a direct address from their general, and they could see a personal sentiment. And I think it's awesome to see how that really just speaks to Lee's character
Yeah.
and the type of man that Lee was and the type of president that he is remembered as, for the immense care that he had over every individual. It did not matter to him what you could offer to him or what contributions you could make. He felt as though you deserved the fullest of his attention and care
Yeah.
just by your presence. And I think that is a legacy that he has really left on Washington and Lee as a whole
yeah.
from an institutional standpoint. And it really shows that even 170 years ago,
156 years since Lee's death, yeah.
156 years ago, that culture is still thriving at Washington.
Oh, yeah. Like, you want to talk about a legacy's left. Like, the culture of trust that makes such things like letting freshmen and students in their first semester or even visiting students, like, into special collections and having so many hands-on experiences. That's something that I think is only really made possible because of the honor system and the immense trust professors place in the hands of their students. And I think it's really so mutually beneficial because I think us as students get the benefit of doing really cool, like hands-on learning and so many opportunities that students at other schools just don't get. But also I think professors have to spend less of their time worrying about being basically a glorified babysitter because these people are professionals in their fields, right? Like they're on the cutting edge of research. And I can't speak for them, but I don't think they would want to spend their time like going over papers and checking for AI or like walking around a classroom while a test is being taken to make sure that nobody's on their phone underneath the table. And like that insane culture of trust and respect that professors have for their students, I think is a direct function of the honor system, which if you want to know the influence Robert E. Lee had on the honor system, there's a million sources through the redoubt or otherwise, but it's pretty direct gift from Lee and his time that we're left with. And I think it benefits us all like to this very day in an insane amount.
Yeah. With looking at the honor system, one of the other documents that we have is the oldest recorded honor pledge. Let me find the document. So another document that they had out was the oldest recorded honor pledge on a Washington and Lee assignment is an assignment from 1849.
Yeah.
And so in it, obviously the verbiage has changed and evolved throughout time to better fit things. But it begins with "on my honor." And so I personally thought for a while that, and was under the impression that Lee introduced the honor system.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting to hear that it already had a presence at Washington and Lee prior to his arrival. But he undoubtedly had an immense presence in expanding the honor system,
Of course,
and just instilling it within the culture to a point that it would eternally survive.
Of course, yeah. And 2 notes on that. I actually, my own research for my archaeology class last semester, I came across like what I think is like the first, and I showed my professor because I'm not in the position of making these grand claims about it, but he was like, this is cool, I haven't seen this before, but in 1795 was the first kind of proto-honor like pledge thing. They were having issues of student misbehavior, and so they wrote something up and they put it in the trustees' minutes, and they said any student that participates in misbehavior, breaking of the rules, which at the time were like no drinking, no swearing, no dancing, no gambling, no card playing, and obviously no cheating on academic assignments, no dishonesty. Any student who breaks those rules or any student who knows of a violation of those rules and doesn't report it, they're both equally guilty and they'll both be brought before the trustees to answer for those actions, which is incredible because 1795 is about the very beginning of the university, honestly. We hadn't even moved to our current spot on front campus yet. And it's insane to see how far back it goes in the university's history. And also with regards to Robert E. Lee, like not just the honor system, but like all forms of student self-governance were incredibly supported by Lee. If you listen to the Neely episode again, You'll hear about how he supported the fraternal system, like student organizations, honor societies. He was a big fan of anything that would give authority to the students, and he trusted them to run it on their own without faculty oversight, which also incidentally is where he did the honor system. Before Lee, it was a kind of a joint of faculty and student-run enterprise, but he gave it over almost fully to the students, and it's remained that way ever since his time.
Yeah, it's really interesting your point to the tracing back to 1795. I'm also in Intro to Anthropology right now.
Yeah.
And one of our recent lessons, we went out to the Liberty Hall ruins.
Yeah.
And that is where the Academy House was. And we got to go over some of the history for the foundings and the origins of what is now W&L. And one of the things, William Graham, he was the original professor and overseer of the institution. So it's funny to me to see that kind of struggle between the desires of the students and the desires of the faculty and how that evolved. So originally, Liberty Hall Academy was a reading school, and you're teaching comprehension to students for their understanding in languages such as Latin because of the religious focus of society at a time. People were largely being educated to go into law and
Clergy,
and become clergymen. And William Graham was becoming very disillusioned with the students going into town and going to the bars and the pubs and drinking and carrying on. And so one of the things the trustees had to do at the time to keep him on and really ensure the survival of the school was they had to turn Liberty Hall into a seminary for a while. To really try to cultivate that culture of like righteousness, and then seeing how that has evolved over time to our current culture with the honor system and how we place such a high emphasis on that.
Yeah, it's incredible, really. Yeah, I mean, that's... So unless you've got more, that's about all I've got for you, Austin. Thanks very much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, man. And to the listeners, thank you very much. Hope to see you next time on Generals on the March. Thank you.